This week in Parliament we concentrated on climate change as the main theme of Labor's attack, and the government were all over the shop. John Howard refused to repudiate his industry minister's previous claim that there's no connections between human activity and climate change, and he was all over the place in terms of the government's position. He kept using the term practical measures. We all know what practical means in the John Howard dictionary. That means don't do anything. We know what practical reconciliation means, for example. The government was in a mess on these issues in the first question time. Malcolm Turnbull put in an extraordinary display in his first attempt, looking more like a pompous barrister. Almost felt like he was going to pull out his fob watch and check it, or put on a monocle, the way that some of his florid phrases emerged. And of course, there was no serious capacity to engage with the core issue here, which is when is the government going to get real about climate change after years of denial, years of refusal to accept the advice of its own scientists, the advice of the International Panel on Climate Change. All of those sources of advice have been ignored. The government's refused to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. It's refused to increase the mandatory renewable energy target. It's refused to do anything about emissions trading. All it does is pork barrel a bit, send out a few bits of money here and there to invest in renewable energy projects to look like it's doing something. Well, public opinion's caught up with it, and it's now in the spotlight, and John Howard just doesn't get it. On Lateline a few nights ago, when asked what would happen if temperatures in Australia on average increased by 4 to 6 degrees, as scientists predict, between now and the end of this century, and his response was to say, well, some people might be a little less comfortable. That's just an extraordinary statement, paralleled by his Environment Minister Malcolm Turnbull's statement that it wouldn't be such a bad thing if sea levels rose by a metre around Australia, because on the east coast the geography and the geology is such that it wouldn't really have a huge impact. Now, first, of course, that's an incorrect statement. The erosion that would generate would have a devastating impact on many parts of built-up Australia, not to mention the wider environment in areas that aren't built up on our coast. But of course it raised the question, what would be happening around the rest of the world? What would happen in the South Pacific, for example? If sea levels are rising by a metre in Australia, it's a fair bet that islands like Tuvalu and Kiribati and all of those very low-lying islands in the South Pacific would be underwater. We also, in question time later in the week, saw Peter Costello unleashed as the big gun, attacking Kevin Rudd and his alleged lack of experience, and using the very comic but ultimately pointless point that the term brutopia, which Kevin had used in some article that he'd written a few months ago as a description, a light-hearted description of John Howard's economic policies, originated in a Donald Duck comic. Well, this was good entertainment, good comedy for Peter Costello. That's the one thing he is good at. But of course, it doesn't make any wider point. It really is trivial. It's childish politics, it's theatre politics that really doesn't take us in any direction at all. So the big issue for the week has been climate change and water. The government failed to get the premiers to sign up to a deal shifting all of the power, all of the authority on the Murray-Darling Basin to the Commonwealth. Unsurprisingly, given the fact that few of the details about what would be entailed, which rivers would be involved, what planning responsibilities would move to Canberra, what the money that the government claims it's committed to spending would actually be spent on. $10 billion over 10 years. John Howard's actually making promises about money that will be spent in 10 years' time when he'll be 77 years old. I don't think even he expects that he'll be around at that time. So all in all, a good start for Labor. We got a long way to go. The opinion poll that came out on Tuesday had us in a very strong position, but these things move around a lot. It's very early days in the battle for the 2007 election, but we've made a good, solid start. I'm very comfortable with the positioning that Kevin Rudd's adopted, and I think the battle is now well and truly joined, and people can see that the party for the future now is Labor. John Howard's really running out of steam. He's off his game, and I think probably in serious decline.